The economy is a set of choices that we make and outcomes we get from those choices. It's like a house that we build every step of the way and decisions we make every step of the way. And so I think it's a really important time to be focused on the economic structures around us that create the outcomes, like poverty and like the racial wealth gap that we live with today, and that are choices we're making today.
So it sounds like you're saying that things are changing when it comes to trickle-down economics, and we can envision the economy that we want to see. But I'm curious to why trickle-down economics has had such a strong hold on the U.S. economy to date.
Yeah, trickle-down economics has had a strong hold on the economy to date because it's a very powerful story, right? It's powerful for us to believe that the system is merit-based and that the unequal outcomes we see today are just the result of poor choices people have made and not the result of decades, if not centuries, of deeply unequal systems. And so it's intoxicating to want to believe that things will work out if we all pull ourselves up by our bootstraps. So it's a persistent myth that's been told across media, lawmakers, the courts, legislation, the academy, right? Like universities really taught this story, and it's a pervasive myth that holds the policy in place. But it's one that has crumbled, one that I think starting in 2008 with the housing crisis and on, it's clear that the promise of trickle-down economics has not panned out, that people are left worse off, in debt, broke, that our society is more brittle and open to authoritarianism than ever before. That is the outcome of trickle-down economics and why I think the order has crumbled.
I think when you talk about the bootstrap myth, it also just reminds me of like the Protestant ethic and the way that this country was founded, and this idea that people who work get what they deserve and those who don't get what they deserve. But we've seen today, right, that people and hardworking Americans are constantly working and they're not being rewarded with what we would all expect these folks to see, given the amount of work that we know they're putting into their lives.
Yeah, that's exactly right. People are working harder than ever. The economy is not working for people.
So you've outlined some important policies that are in place, some policies that are in progress. What are some other changes that you'd love to see enacted that would have a long-term effect on how this country values families and children?
Well, I think the big picture is the understanding that, as Derek Hamilton says, the purpose of the economy should be about human flourishing, should be about families and children flourishing, to be able to not just survive, but thrive. And that could be the goal of the richest nation on earth. That is the number one thing that we can do and should do to support families right across race, religion, and zip code in this country. Everyone could thrive, and that there's a way to do that, and that it's already starting to happen. And you know, over the last few years, we've seen extraordinary movement from ideas to actual scaled up policies. You know, the pandemic policy making proved that if we want to support families and children in a moment of crisis, we can. We can send child tax credit checks to nearly every parent in America. We can expand Medicaid. Even when millions of people lose their job, we can have the lowest number of uninsured Americans in history. We had the lowest number of Americans living in poverty in history during one of the most extraordinary crises of a lifetime. So we have the blueprint for how to do it. We need the political will to get us there.
Totally agree. And I'm wondering if you can kind of put a finer point on what you just said. I know I asked the question in relation specifically to children and families, but for people who don't have children, why is it important for children and families to thrive in our country? How does this impact them? What is the so what to other individuals?
Well, everyone was once a child, and everyone lives with the experiences of their childhood. And we know that poverty is violence, that we know what it means for children to go hungry, to not have access to a quality education, to not have access to higher education. We know what that means. And so it's incredibly important to invest in the next generation so that we have a shot at a thriving multiracial democracy in this country.
Right now, I think I would say that it is also a very tumultuous time for Black and brown people and people of color and people with marginalized identities. So curious what you do to stay motivated and hopeful in the work that you do during these challenging times.
Well, Mariama Kaba has a quote that is, "Hope is a discipline." And that has really stuck with me because there are some days you wake up and it doesn't feel very hopeful naturally. And you scroll the headlines and it feels quite dismal. But hope is a discipline, that in the dark times, there is still light to be found. And it's our job to sometimes be that light and sometimes look for that light because there will be a way out in the end.
I love that. I also just love all the quotes that you're sharing from notable folks in the field and writers and authors. It seems like you do a lot of reading yourself.
Yeah, I try to. I mean, we're living in a moment where it's accessible to get, inspiration and thought from some of the great leaders living in our time, right? Not just of decades past, which we also have. There's a lot of hope around. Social change isn't linear, right? And there are twists and turns and step backwards in this moment. But the job of the organizer, the work of people who believe in dignity and for families and something better for our children, our job is to keep building this big, beautiful vision of what we deserve, right? Not what we'll accept, not what we think is politically feasible in any current moment, but what we deserve as human beings, right? The kindness, the care, the thriving that should be our right? Our guarantee. And if we hold on to that, and if we work together, we can really move the needle on what's possible. And I know because I've seen that change happen, right? I've been laughed out of rooms talking about ideas that have become mainstream. Things like a guaranteed income just a few years ago have become operationalized at the federal level as the expanded child tax credit. And so I know things can change because they already have, and our job is to keep believing that.